My name is Derrick Kearney. I'm going to be talking to you guys a little bit about this thing called Selenium Webdriver, and we're gonna go over some examples, some code examples written in Python today. So Selenium Webdriver is all about automating web browsers. Right? So the goal is to write a script in some kind of programming language. We're going to talk about Python, but it's available for a number of programming languages like Java, C#. I think there's JavaScript bindings. There are PHP bindings. But our goal is to be able to launch web browsers. We want to manipulate items in web browsers. So if there are buttons on the web page, we want to be able to push those buttons. If there are forms or input fields, we want to be able to write text into those input fields. And if there's images, maybe we want to download images, stuff like that. So anything that a user would want to do inside of a web browser, we would like to be able to automate that. And our goal for doing this is really to be able to go on websites and check to see if things are actually how we think they are, right? So some people call this testing, right? But I just read an interesting article last night that was talking about the difference between checking and testing. And they were saying that a lot of things that we call testing are really, we're just checking. We're just verifying that the way we think things should work is actually how it is working, right? And they make the distinction, I think they made the distinction that testing would be to uncover new knowledge about a system, right? So you can use checks to as part of your testing, but testing is really, I don't know how the system will work under these conditions, so I'm going to try out a bunch of things and I'm going to discover new knowledge about the system by testing. All right, so we're going to be doing checks from that perspective. All right, so one way you can run Selenium WebDriver is you write a script, and then that script calls some Selenium libraries, and so the Selenium libraries will take your request, send it over to either a Selenium server, or it will send it over to a web browser with an extension installed inside of it, which basically implements a Selenium server. And then that extension will take care of actually automating the web browser. And so they take this approach because this works. This protocol, this WebDriver protocol, it works among lots of different browsers. So you could use it with Firefox, or you could use it with Chrome, or the Windows IE browsers, or Mac Safari browsers. And they all work a little bit different because everybody's implementing the WebDriver protocol. And they implement it in that web browser's specific extension, right? So one thing I will note is that WebDriver, Selenium WebDriver is essentially Selenium 2.0. It's the second version, their second try at getting web browser automation working. The first try was just called Selenium, right? And Selenium, you ran it through a server, and it had similar ideas, but it had some drawbacks where because they were basically acting as a man in the middle in your script, there were some things you couldn't do quite right? And so the thing with WebDriver is that they're trying to hook in more cleanly to the web browser's own automation protocols. All right. So a second way you can run Selenium is they have this thing called Selenium Grid, and Selenium Grid allows you to write a script. So you might write a bunch of different checks, and you send all your checks to the Selenium Grid server, and then it will farm it off among a whole bunch of computers on the grid, and each of them will be running different browsers and running your checks in parallel. So if you have a bunch of checks and you can't wait for them to all run, then you can run them in parallel using the Selenium grid. All right, so let's get into it. I'm going to show you guys an example. We're going to go through some code, how to get that example working. Our first example is going to be, we just want to fill in a login form, right? That's a common thing you want to do if you're writing checks. You go to a system and all the interesting stuff is stuck behind some kind of authentication. You have to be a special person to get into the website. And so we want to be able to identify a username field and then fill it in with a username. And then we want to identify a password field and fill it in with a password. And then lastly, we want to push the login button, right? So we can get access to the system. And this is actually like if you're running checks on a bunch of websites, like this is maybe the most common thing you do. So if your login fails, then everything fails, almost everything. Right? All right. So first thing, if you want to get started with Selenium, first thing you have to do is you have to. Well, I guess we're going to load up the Selenium WebDriver library within Python, and you can do that with from Selenium import WebDriver. Very simple. Next thing, we want to start up a web browser. So you start off with your WebDriver object. You ask it for a Firefox web browser. There's other web browsers that we talked about earlier, Chrome. They all have a class that you can load up. And so we're going to call our browser variable a Firefox web browser. Right? All right. Next thing you want to do is you want to navigate to some kind of web page. Right? So we have our URL. The URL we'll be using throughout these examples is hub0.org. And so we're going to navigate to the hub0.org web page. So you can use the get function of your browser object to do that. And then I have the ellipsis in there. Usually in that space you do all the hard work, like finding elements and stuff. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But at the very end, you want to shut down your browser, and you can use the quit method to shut down your browser. And that's basically what a script looks like. All right, so the interesting stuff starts when you want to find elements on a web page. So there's two functions that you can use to locate elements. There's the find element function, and there's the find element by something function, right? So it's like find element by X. And usually these find element by something functions they all call back to the find element function. But there's different ways of locating elements on a web page. So different locating strategies. There's the CSS selector strategy. There's XPath you can use. There is you can locate elements by link names, like the text inside of a link. And all these element locating strategies are basically going through the HTML DOM that you get back from asking for a web page and searching through the DOM for the element. All right. So if we want to find our username field, the first thing we have to do is be able to locate. We have to be able to describe where our username field is on the web page. How would we be able to identify a username field on the web page? And we do this by first looking at the HTML and figuring out what kind of elements make that username field unique. So as you see here, we have a little bit of HTML that describes what this username field looks like. So our username field has an ID tag of username. It has a class of input box. The type is text. And the name is also username. So if we wanted to locate this field by ID, then we could say our ID for the field is username, and we could use the find element by ID function, and then we give it the ID of our of our field. And IDs in HTML are they're supposed to be unique, right? You might get to a web page where it's not unique, but for the most part, they're supposed to be unique. So they're a really good way of actually being able to locate elements on the web page. All right, we could also find our element by name. So our element happens to have the name of username, and we could use the find element by name function to locate the element as well. As long as there's no other fields on that web page with the name username, right? All right, so we could also use this locating strategy called XPath. XPath is a way of parsing through an XML file and locating elements. And so of the two locating strategies, I guess there's three locating strategies that I always consider. There's the ID locating strategy, which we talked about earlier, the XPath locating strategy, which I find very convenient if you have to do a little bit of navigation in order to find your field, and CSS selectors, which we'll talk about in a second. But the XPath locating strategy allows you to either from the beginning or from the top of your HTML DOM or from anywhere in the middle of your HTML DOM describe how to get to a particular element within that DOM. So in our case, we're going to start from // which is the root node, and we're looking for an input field, something with an element with the tag input that has an attribute of ID equal to username. Right? So XPath has its own little language that you can use to describe how elements relate to each other. A second locator that we could use is we're looking for from the root node, we're looking for an input that has an input field that contains an attribute whose class attribute contains input box. So within the HTML, you could have a number of different classes that are associated with a specific element. And we could have said, just like up here, we could have said our class element is equal to input box. But if you have multiple classes in your class attribute, if instead of this being a string, if it's a list of strings, then looking for equality is not sufficient, right? You have to look to see if your class list contains the string that you're looking for. So, all right. But once you have an XPath locator, you can stick it into the find element by XPath function, and that will allow you to retrieve an element from the DOM. All right. So the fourth one we'll go over is CSS selectors. CSS selectors, they use the same locating strategy as you would in regular, if you were writing a CSS file to style a web page. The syntax is very similar to XPath in the way that you think about it. So in our case, we'd be looking for an element with the name of input, and it has an ID equal to username. Or you could use a little bit of shorthand. So if you say hashtag username, that means the hashtag means input field with the name of username. And if you use a dot in front of your string, then that means that you're looking for something with the class of a name input box. So once you have a CSS selector that describes your element, you can use the find element by CSS selector locator. All right, so there's also, you can look for things by link, right? So looking for things by link, you're just looking for elements that have the link text that you provided, right? So in this case, we're looking for a link that has the name register, and we can say find element by link text, and it will find the first element with the link text of register. Now this approach it's very brittle, it's fragile, right? Because if you have the link named register anywhere else on the page, it could find that one first. Right? So on our login page, we actually have the link register twice. Right? So if you were looking for this register, then you couldn't use the link text to find it. You would get this first link text. You'd get this first link returned back to you. It'd probably lead to the same place, but if you were checking to see if this one actually took you to a register page, your check would be invalid because you were using the wrong link. All right. So different ways of locating elements. All right, so back to our example. Now that we know, we have kind of an idea of how to locate elements, we'd like to actually interact with elements. So in our example, we were trying to fill in the username field. So we can use either the find element function to provide it with some kind of locator type and the value of a locator. In our case, we're going to stick with the CSS selectors. So we're going to say that our username field, it was an input field, and we saw that it had an ID of username. So we're going to use that as our CSS selector, and we'll use the find element by CSS selector function to locate the element. We get back a Selenium element object, and it has a few methods on it that you can use. Some of the, for an input field, some of the more useful methods are the clear method, so you can clear out whatever text was already in there. And then it has this send keys method. All right. So first thing we'll do is we'll clear out the element, and then we'll send it a set of keys. So sending keys is like typing into your field. So just as a user would, you can type whatever you'd like to type in there. All right. We'll do the same thing with the password field. Please don't write down my secret password. All right. So we find the element, we clear it out, and then we send keys. Whatever your password is, you can send it in there. All right, and then the last thing we want to do is we want to locate the login button so that we can click it. Right? So our login button ends up having HTML that looks like this, and we'll use the name field in order to locate it. So we're looking for an input element whose name attribute is equal to submit, and that will locate our object. And then the next thing we want to do is click it. So once you click it, then it will log you in. So in order to log in, here's kind of the full script that you would write to automate your login process. With no error checking, of course, right? Who needs error checking? All right, so some other things you can do, traversing tables. So on the let's see, that would be your left-hand side. We have this whole list of elements, and sometimes you want to just go through the list, or you want to look for a specific item in the list. A lot of times, if you haven't instrumented your HTML code well with IDs, so you can quickly find things, then sometimes you have to loop through elements in a list in order to find things by text or something. So in this case, we have a unordered list of items, and you can see the first one It has it's the dashboard element, and then if you keep going down, you'll find one of these called groups, right? And if we wanted to locate that element, we could use the CSS selector that says we're looking for an unordered list with an ID of page menu. So that would get us down to this point in our HTML. And then directly under it, we use the greater than sign for directly under it. So directly under it, we're looking for a list item whose fourth child, so that would be, this would be the first one, dashboard, and then 2 and 3 are somewhere in here, and then 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're looking for a link inside of that, an anchor tag. So that would give us this specific field here. And if we wanted to click it, then we could grab the element and call the click method on it. So there's lots of different ways to write your CSS. So in this case, let's see. We're looking for an unordered list whose ID, page menu, and then somewhere underneath that unordered list, we're looking for an anchor tag whose class is groups, right? So that's a little bit, maybe a little bit easier to read than that one. Or you could use the shorthand where you say hashtag page menu, so we're looking for ID page menu, and dot groups. And that would get, those all would give you the same element. All right, so once we understand how to locate the elements, we could grab a list of these things using the find elements by CSS selector. So a little bit different from the function we were calling before. Before we were calling find element, which would return one single element, the first element that it finds that matches this selector. The find element returns a whole list of elements for you. So and then once you have that list, you can iterate through them, asking for the anchor tag and then printing out the link text or whatever you'd like to do. You could click them all if you wanted to, I guess. All right, or you could, I guess if you wanted to do a little bit more introspection in the HTML, you could grab an attribute from within each element and print that out. So in this case, they're grabbing the title attribute and then they're printing that out. So. All right, so a couple of topics. If you're just getting started with Selenium, a couple of things that you may run into. Timing is everything with these, right? So if you make a function call, and you're saying, "Hey, get me this URL," and then perform these other actions after that URL loads. Sometimes, because we have things like JavaScript or Ajax, I guess, where pages are never, it's very hard to tell when is a page finished loading, right? You go to Google Maps and you ask it for a map and it gives you back, it loads the page up, but it's still running some JavaScript in the background and it's loading up the page tiles. And an automation program like Selenium says, "Hey, the page loaded, I'm ready to go on and do the next thing," right? And so sometimes you need a little bit of a fudge factor in there to say, if you can't find an element, maybe just hang around and wait a little bit. Don't immediately come back to me and say, "Hey, I couldn't find the element," right? Because it may still be loading. So that's what implicit waits are all about. So it's saying implicitly wait, like anytime I ask you for an element, just wait a few seconds if you don't find the element immediately. So one place where we would see this happen is you want to open up a URL and then find your username field inside of the login field, the login page, right? So the first thing you do is you open up your browser, you load up a URL, and it's still loading the page, but Selenium thinks that the page is already loaded, and then it says, okay, now I need to find this element, and what happens is that Selenium, if you don't wait implicitly for some amount of time, then Selenium will die and says, hey, I couldn't find the element. And when you go to look at the browser, you look at it, you're like, hey, I think like I see it right there. Why didn't you see it, right? So the solution to something like this is to put in an implicit wait. And that's just one command. It affects all the rest of your code that's running. You just say implicitly wait 30 seconds, right? So, and what that does is next time anytime it comes to one of these find element by or find element methods, if it doesn't find the element, it'll hang around and it'll wait in a loop until either the element shows up or the 30 seconds is up. And if it doesn't find the element, then it'll throw an error after that. So that's one thing I found very useful in using Selenium for automation. Next thing is explicit waits. So sometimes you know things are going to take a few seconds, or you're looking for something to happen after performing an action, right? And you can specify your own kind of waiting period and the condition that you want to wait until, a certain condition happens, right? So that's what explicit waits are all about. So the normal thing you might see in a program is that somebody they'll write a program and they will put in like a for loop where they sleep for 10 seconds or they sleep for however many seconds. And in order to keep code clean in Selenium, what they've done is they've kind of wrapped up all that code into a construct called a Webdriver wait. And the Webdriver wait, you give it the browser object that you're going to be looking for elements in, or you're going to be that you need to pass to your condition. And then you tell it how long to wait. So in this case, we're going to wait for 10 seconds. And then you call the until, or there's also an until not for negation function. And you provide that with some kind of condition, right? So typically a condition is we're waiting for an element to show up on a page, or we're waiting for an element to disappear from a page. If we go back to our login example, you may want to, how do you know when you've actually finished logging in, right? How do you you could check to see if the username field is on the web page. So if we were on a web page and the username field was still there, then we know that maybe it's still thinking about logging us in. But if we're on a web page and maybe we see a log out button, we know that, hey, we've logged in successfully. Right? So in this case, an example of a condition we might wait for is visibility of an element located. Right? So we're looking to see, is an element on the web page, or in the HTML DOM, I should say. And the second condition that's hidden in here is it visible? Right? So elements, just because they're in the DOM, does not mean that the user can see them. So we have to take that in consideration as well. So I guess we're looking to see if our username field is visible to the user in this case. All right. And the last topic we'll go over today is dealing with Ajax, right? So we mentioned before, Ajax kind of throws a monkey wrench in our plans because things happen, and we kind of have to account for them. And it's kind of tricky to account for them without thinking about using these Webdriver wait types of constructs, right? So in this case, we're submitting a support ticket, and you want to go through and fill in all the elements of your field, maybe add a screenshot, and in the end, you end up getting something that looks like this: sending report. And if you didn't use any kind of Webdriver wait type of construct, then your automation script may say, "Hey, I got this page back, and I am ready to move on to the next thing, which may be to get the ticket number. Right? So when the support ticket has really finished being submitted, it's going to give you back a ticket number and a button. You can say add a new report or whatever. But usually in some of my tests, I'm really interested in the ticket number because then I want to log back into the system and either close the ticket or I want to add a comment to the ticket, something like that. So if I wanted to deal with this little bit of Ajax, I would use the Webdriver wait construct that we were just talking about. The HTML for this little area up here kind of looks like this, where you have an ID of TR success, and somewhere underneath there you have a link, and the text of that link is our ticket number. So we could use that information to come up with a Webdriver wait condition where we're going to wait for 60 seconds. So we're going to allow 60 seconds for our support ticket to be submitted. And our condition would be just a little function, a Lambda function, that accepts one element or one parameter, the browser. And we're going to ask the browser to find the element by ID TR success, which is this whole block of code HTML here. And we're going to say, wait until this TR success is displayed. And then once this block of code is displayed to the user, we're going to grab the text of the anchor tag that's underneath it. And that text is actually our ticket number. So, and I think that's it. So that's kind of like your brief Selenium primer. That gets you pretty far. If you can locate elements, perform actions on elements, that's pretty much the basics of using Selenium. There are more advanced topics like, okay, now that I can locate and interact with elements, I want to do this in a way so that I don't have to, like if I'm using a login page, I don't want to have to write that login code, those 9 lines of code for every test that I write, right? So now we're starting to get into the idea of a design pattern called a page object. So where you say, I have a web page and I want a class that represents a portion of this web page, right? And that way, anytime I want to log in, I just call the login class, I give it, or a function under the login class, I give it a username and password, and it just takes care of the rest of locating the elements and logging me in. So, all right. Excellent.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
You guys have fun?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you do screen captures?
Yes. So, and it's very useful to do that. Not only can you do, well, I guess within Selenium they have a function. I think it's part of the browser, which to take a screenshot of it ends up taking a screenshot of the whole web page, which is yeah. So you don't have to scroll or anything, right? And so that's very useful because a lot of times, unless inside of your code you're actively scrolling to make sure that the elements are in view, then you could be interacting with an element that is not in view. Selenium tries to move your browser to the right place, so to make sure that the element is in view, because their goal is to make sure that you're interacting with the browser just as a user would, right?
Coffee's made if I want to.
Excellent. Coffee.
Can you also resize windows?
Yes.
What if you're testing media queries?
Say again?
If you're testing media queries, then things will render differently.
Oh. So yeah, you can. So that's one thing I do. I've written a bunch of code around kind of Selenium to get environments that I'm interested in, right? So a lot of times I just want things to fit properly, so that when I'm looking at the test happening, I can actually follow along with what's going on without too much mainly side-to-side scrolling, right? So I make my browser 1024 by 768, and another thing I do is I run my browsers inside of X virtual frame buffer, XVFB, right? So and that allows me to record the whole session. Right, I was very happy with being able to take pictures, but it's just a snapshot, and a lot of times you don't realize what's going on until you actually see the whole process of the test failing, and then you're like, oh, I get it. Like you totally didn't, because it'll take a screenshot and it'll be like, well, this is there, right? But because of the timing issues, I've kind of written code to allow me to record the whole session, and then also sometimes even that's not enough. You want to see exactly what element it's looking for, so I also highlight elements as I'm searching for them, and so that's good for showing other people what's happening. Because if you ever watch the browser being automated, it goes as fast as it can because that's what computers do, and then and so you just see pages flying by and scrolling happening, and it happens so fast you like can't even tell it. You're just like, just watch this for a second, and we'll talk about it after it's done. So, yeah, go ahead.
So, you obviously test what you build when you build it. So when do you get to the point where you're doing checking?
Yeah. So the situation that I'm in at work is that I believe that people test things when they build it, and then code goes out to production systems, and then they build something else, and more code goes out to the production systems, but you run into a problem if you have enough code where you cannot test it all at once, right? Like you made changes to the system, but you can't go back through because it's just too time constraining. There are too many little pieces that you have to test to go through and test the old stuff that you wrote. You just rely on faith that the old stuff still works. And because you changed the system, that's not always true. So.
Anything else? I guess that's it.
All right. Excellent.
Derrick, I appreciate it.
No problem.